It starts with something all too familiar. A sheriff's deputy pulling over a black woman on a quiet highway in North Carolina. To some, it might look routine, but you and I both know it never is. What happens next? A chokehold. A gun drawn. And the biggest mistake of his career, because this woman isn't just anybody. She's not some helpless target. She's not someone who folds under pressure. No, she's the deputy director of the FBI. And she's about to show the world what happens when power meets the truth. Head on. This isn't just a story about a corrupt cop. It's a fight for justice that pulls back the curtain on an entire system. And trust me, you're not ready for how it ends. So stick with us. And while you're here, tell us what time are you listening and where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Let's dive in. It was a quiet stretch of road, the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen until it did. Alexis Monroe, deputy director of the FBI, was heading home after a long day. The sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the Carolina foothills. Her black Chevrolet Tahoe rolled down a narrow two-lane highway just outside Asheville. The sky had that warm golden glow that made the trees along the roadside look like they were on fire. It should have been peaceful, but something didn't feel right. Alexis wasn't a woman easily rattled. She'd spent 30 years in law enforcement, starting as a beat cop in Atlanta, rising through the ranks to lead counter-terrorism operations. She'd faced cartel bosses, arms dealers, and foreign spies. But tonight, something was crawling under her skin, something she couldn't shake. Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. There it was, a pair of headlights, too close, a little too aggressive, a white county sheriff's cruiser. No siren, no flashing lights, just tailing her for miles. She told herself it was nothing, maybe just another driver headed the same way. But her instincts whispered otherwise. She eased her foot off the gas, letting the cruiser pass if it wanted to. But it didn't. It stayed right on her bumper. She glanced down at the dashboard clock. 7:26 p.m. The last light of day slipping away. The highway stretched empty ahead of her, nothing but trees, old farmhouses set far back off the road, and the occasional flicker of porch lights in the distance. Alexis knew this road well. It was a shortcut back to the city, one she'd taken hundreds of times. But this time, every inch of it felt wrong. Her grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. She wasn't speeding. She wasn't swerving. She wasn't doing anything to justify being pulled over. And yet, the cruiser sped up. In her rearview mirror, she could make out the silhouette of the Drivera, white male, square jaw, shaved head, sunglasses still on even though the sun was nearly gone, his left hand resting just a little too close to his radio. Alexis felt that old, familiar tension rise in her chest, the kind that told her she was no longer just a citizen on the road. She was a target. She reached over to the passenger seat, calmly sliding her FBI identification out of her leather briefcase, placing it on the dashboard in plain sight. A silent message to whoever was behind her: think twice. But the cruiser didn't back off. That's when the blue and red lights finally lit up. Alexis swallowed hard. She knew this game. A late stop, a rural road, no witnesses, no backup. She'd read the reports. She'd investigated the complaints. Too many of them ended the same way with someone like her, black and unarmed, pinned to the ground, or worse. She signaled right, pulling her Tahoe over onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under her tires. She cut the engine, rolled down her window 3/4 of the way, and placed both hands visibly on the wheel, palms up, fingers spread, like she'd taught new recruits at the academy 1,000 times before. The cruiser didn't park behind her. It pulled up alongside her door, almost brushing against her side mirror, an intimidation tactic. Alexis stayed still, her heart thudding slow and steady. This wasn't about traffic. It never was. It was about power, control. And something told her this was going to get worse before it got better. The driver's door creaked open, and out stepped Deputy Sheriff Ray Connolly. She recognized him the second he stood up straight, hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. Ray was known around Buncombe County. Whispers about him had reached the bureau months ago: aggressive stops, complaints that never seemed to stick. No body cam footage ever surfaced. No internal investigations ever moved forward. Typical small-town immunity. He strolled toward her window like he owned the road. boots kicking up dust with every step. Alexis didn't move. He leaned in without saying a word. His breath hitched. His lip curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. More like a challenge. And that's when Alexis felt the shift. This wasn't routine. This wasn't random. This was something much, much darker. She braced herself, took a slow breath, and prepared for what was coming next. The gravel was still settling beneath her tires when Alexis Monroe glanced up and locked eyes with Deputy Sheriff Ray Connolly. He stood there like a man looking for trouble, and from the way his fingers hovered near his holster, Alexis knew he was hoping to find it. He didn't say a word. Not at first. He just stood there, leaning his thick forearm on the top of her window frame, his body blocking the fading sunlight like a shadow creeping over her face. His breath smelled of tobacco and cheap coffee. His jaw clenched as he scanned her from head to toe, like she was something stuck to the bottom of his boot. Alexis kept her hands right where he could see them, fingers wide, palms flat on the wheel. She knew the drill. She'd spent decades teaching others how to survive these moments. But no amount of training could ever prepare you for the way a man like this looked at you like you didn't belong, like you were a problem just waiting to be erased. His first words weren't a question. They weren't even a greeting. They were a command. License and registration. Now. His voice cracked like a whip sharp, impatient, designed to trigger fear. But Alexis didn't flinch. She took a breath, steady and slow, making sure every move was deliberate, easy to read. She glanced toward her passenger seat where her wallet sat on top of her bag. "I'm reaching for my wallet, officer," she said calmly, her voice clear but respectful. He didn't answer. He didn't nod. He didn't say she could move. He just stood there, staring like a man daring her to make the wrong move. Alexis knew that silence was a trap, but she wasn't about to give him the satisfaction. She moved anyway, but slower than slow, reaching carefully with her right hand, keeping her left hand planted on the wheel. She picked up her wallet, flipped it open, and pulled out her license along with her FBI credentials. She held them up, high enough for him to see, clear enough that there could be no mistake. The gold badge shimmered in the fading light, but Ray didn't lean in to inspect it. He didn't reach for it. Instead, he laughed, a low, throaty chuckle that made Alexis' skin crawl. "FBI?" he scoffed, like she'd just told him she was the Queen of England. "That's real cute." He leaned in closer. So close that Alexis could feel the heat from his breath on her cheek. "You think that little piece of metal means something out here?" he sneered. His voice dripped with something Alexis had heard before. Not just disrespect, but disgust. She kept her posture strong, calm, professional. But deep down, her instincts were screaming. This wasn't about a traffic stop. It never had been. It was about her. Her skin, her presence, her audacity to exist in a space this man thought belonged to him. She opened her mouth to speak to, calmly ask the legal reason for this stop, but before she could get the words out, his hand shot through the window. His fingers clamped around her throat. It happened so fast. 1 second she was sitting still. The next, she couldn't breathe. Ray's grip tightened like a vice, his knuckles white with pressure. Her body jerked back against the seat as the air was stolen from her lungs. Alexis gasped, her hands instinctively flying up to grab his wrist. But she stopped, her cell fingers hovering in midair. If she fought back, he'd say she attacked him. If she struggled, he'd claim self-defense. She knew exactly how this story ended for women like her. Her eyes burned with tears, not from fear, but from the searing lack of oxygen. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Ray leaned in closer, pressing his face near hers, smiling like a man who had already decided she didn't deserve to make it home tonight. "What's the matter?" he whispered, his voice low and hateful. "Badge not working now, is it?" Alexis felt her vision darkening at the edges. Time slowed to a crawl. Somewhere, deep in her mind, the part of her trained to survive took over. She knew what she had to do. Using the last ounce of strength she had left, she forced her right hand down just an inch toward her smartwatch, resting against the steering column. 1 quick tap. 2. It was all she needed. The silent panic Codea signal that only the FBI's rapid response team would recognize. 2 minutes. That's all they had to reach her. And as Ray's grip tightened around her throat, Alexis prayed to God that it would be enough. Ray's fingers dug deeper into Alexis's throat, cutting off every breath, every word, every ounce of dignity. For a second, She swore the entire world went silent like time itself had frozen. The warm North Carolina breeze, the rustling trees, even the faint hum of distant traffic, it all disappeared. There was nothing but the sound of her own heartbeat, thumping louder and louder in her ears, and the sharp pressure crushing her windpipe. Alexis Monroe, deputy director of the FBI, could feel her body getting heavier, her arms going numb, the heat of the steering wheel slipping from her fingertips. But then, just when her vision started to blur, Ray let go. Like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just tried to choke the life out of her right there on the side of a public highway. Alexis coughed, gasping for air, her chest rising and falling as she struggled to catch her breath. Her throat burned. Every swallow felt like sandpaper scraping her insides, but she stayed silent. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Ray leaned back slightly, his hands resting on his utility belt, looking her up and down like she was some stray dog he'd found in his driveway. I said, "Step out of the vehicle." He barked again, louder this time, like she hadn't heard him the first time. Alexis glanced toward the road, half hoping, praying that someone had seen what just happened, that maybe someone had stopped. But the highway was empty again, silent, still. Ray stepped back, one hand resting on the butt of his gun, his other hand tugging at the radio mic on his shoulder. But he didn't call it in. He didn't ask for backup. He didn't log the stop. And that told Alexis everything she needed to know. He wasn't following procedure. He wasn't playing by the book. No, Ray Connolly was writing his own rules tonight, and she was the story he planned to finish. Alexis kept her voice steady as she spoke, fighting the pain in her throat. "I'd like to know the reason for this stop, officer," she managed to say, her voice hoarse but controlled. Ray laughed again, not the kind of laugh you hear when something's funny, but the kind that lets you know you're one wrong word away from things getting a whole lot worse. He leaned in so close that Alexis could see the sweat collecting on his upper lip. "You don't get to ask questions," he hissed. "Not out here." He reached into the window again, not to choke her this time, but to unlock her door from the inside. Click. The sound of the lock releasing echoed like a gunshot inside her head. Before Alexis could brace herself, Ray yanked the door open so hard it rattled on its hinges. He grabbed her by the arm, pulling her out of the SUV with a jerk so violent her knees buckled. Alexis stumbled but caught herself, planting her feet firmly on the gravel. She didn't resist. She didn't pull away. She knew better. One wrong move, and this man would claim she'd assaulted an officer. Ray spun her around, shoving her face first against the side of the Tahoe. The metal burned against her cheek, still hot from sitting in the sun all day. Her badge lay on the dashboard just inches away, still shimmering under the glass, but completely useless now. Ray leaned in, pressing his weight against her back, trapping her against the vehicle. "I don't care who you think you are," he growled. "Out here, you're nobody." He yanked her arms behind her, fumbling for his handcuffs, breathing heavy like he was working overtime to prove a point. Alexis clenched her jaw, biting back every instinct to fight, to push back, to remind him who he was dealing with. But she couldn't risk it, not yet, because she knew what he didn't. Help was coming. She just had to survive 2 more minutes. Across town, Captain Jenna Clark was already en route, with her tactical Team 3 black SUVs cutting through city traffic like a blade. Helicopters were in the air. Federal protocols had been activated. But that wouldn't mean a damn thing if Alexis didn't make it through the next few moments alive. Ray pressed his forearm into her back, using his body to pin her in place. She could feel the cold edge of the cuffs grazing her wrist. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," he sneered, tightening his grip. But Alexis knew the truth. He was the one making the mistake. He was the one leaving a trail, and the world was about to see every second of it. She turned her head slightly, just enough to speak without showing fear. "You're being recorded," she said, her voice steady as a blade. "Everything you do from this moment on will follow you for the rest of your life." Ray froze just for a second, but it was long enough. Long enough for Alexis to know she'd just lit the fuse. Ray's body didn't move right away. His breath hitched. For the first time all night, Alexis felt hesitation. It was small, almost invisible, but she knew hesitation when she felt it. It only lasted a second. But a second was all she needed to remind herself to stay standing, to stay breathing, to keep control of her mind, even if she had no control over what came next. Ray's weight shifted behind her, She could feel his grip tighten on the handcuffs again, pulling her wrists higher up her back, forcing her to wince. But she refused to make a sound. She bit down hard on the inside of her cheek. She wasn't giving him the satisfaction of hearing her cry out. She wasn't giving him anything, and that's when Ray lost it. With no warning, no reason, no fear of being watched, Ray suddenly spun her around and slammed his forearm straight across her throat, forcing her body back into the Tahoe with bone-jarring force. Alexis choked on instinct, her back arching from the impact, her throat closing again under the pressure of his arm. It felt like all the air in her lungs was ripped out in a single heartbeat. His face was so close now. She could see the wild flicker in his bloodshot eyes. His teeth clenched like a man who'd waited his whole miserable life for this exact moment of control. "You don't tell me what follows me," he hissed, pressing harder, crushing her windpipe. Alexis tried to move, but her body locked up. The harder she struggled to breathe, the more he leaned in, gritting his teeth like he was enjoying every second of it. And right then, for a split second, she wondered if this was it, if this was how her story ended. On the side of a back road in North Carolina, with no sirens, no witnesses, just one angry cop who decided her life wasn't worth letting continue. She could feel her knees starting to give out. The edges of her vision turned black again. But then, something shifted in the air. A fin noise, like tires on gravel. Someone was there. Ray didn't notice it at first. He was too busy squeezing the life out of her. But Alexis heard it, a soft scraping sound, not far away. Someone's boots, approaching, slowly. Her eyes strained, darting toward the road. And there, standing in the distance, was an old man, standing by the fence line. He held up something in his hand. It was shaking, but it was steady enough for Alexis to recognize it. A phone, recording. And just like that, her survival instincts roared back to life. She couldn't breathe, but she could move. And she did. With everything she had left, Alexis drove her knee upward, catching Ray just off balance. Not enough to injure him, not enough to fight back, but enough to make his grip loosen just for a second, enough to make him shift his stance, enough to break the choke. She coughed hard, sucking air back into her lungs as Ray stumbled half a step back, his face twisted in rage. "You," he started, but he stopped because now he saw it too. The old man. The phone. Ray's face turned red, his jaw locked tight, and for a split second, Alexis saw something dangerous flash across his face. Not fear, not guilt, but defiance. He didn't care who was watching. He didn't care that there was a camera. He wanted to make an example out of her. Ray reached for his gun. Not his cuffs, not his radio. His gun. He unlatched the holster with a snap, drawing the black Glock with a speed that made Alexis's stomach twist. He leveled it at her chest, finger hovering over the trigger. And then he laughed so loud it echoed off the trees like a twisted joke only he could hear. He took a step closer, barrel pointed right at her heart. "You know what?" he said, shaking his head slowly. "Go ahead. Show him your little badge again. Let's see if that saves you." Alexis didn't move. She didn't breathe. She didn't dare reach for anything, because she knew this man wasn't bluffing. And if she so much as twitched wrong, he was going to pull that trigger. Her eyes flicked toward the man still recording. She didn't know who he was, but in that moment, he was the only witness she had left. Ray stepped closer, pressing the barrel right against her chest, just over her heart. So close she could feel the cold steel through her blouse. "You got 2 seconds to beg," he whispered, low and hateful. But Alexis didn't beg. She didn't plead. She didn't move. She just stared into his eyes, steady, unblinking, and said absolutely nothing, because she knew her team was coming, and they were almost out of time. Alexis could feel the cold barrel of the gun pressing into her chest. She could feel her heart pounding so hard, it felt like it was pushing right back against the steel. And yet, she didn't move. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Ray Connolly stood there like a man completely untouchable, smiling like he had already won. But just a few feet away, unnoticed by Ray, someone else was standing their ground. Leonard Price, a retired Army veteran, 66 years old, 2 bad knees, hands that shook just a little more than they used to. But today, Leonard's hands were steady enough. He stood at the edge of the gravel, phone raised, recording everything. He didn't have a badge. He didn't have a weapon. All he had was the truth, captured in a shaky phone lens. Leonard had seen enough in his life to recognize when something wasn't right, and nothing about this was right. He'd been sitting on his porch, sipping iced tea like he did every evening, when he noticed the cruiser tailing that black SUV for miles. He watched, curious at first, but when the cruiser didn't back off, his stomach started to turn. He'd seen stops on this road before, too many, and they didn't always end with both people driving away. So Leonard stood up, grabbed his phone, walked to the fence line, and hit record. And what he saw broke something deep inside him. A grown man choking a woman, dragging her out of her car, slamming her against the hood, pointing a gun right at her heart. Leonard's chest tightened. His mind raced. He'd seen things like this before on the news, on social media, but now it was here, right in front of him. And he knew, deep down, that if he didn't record this, nobody would believe it happened. His voice shook as he whispered to himself, "Not again, not this time." He knew better than to shout, knew better than to run toward them. That would only make things worse. Maybe for her, maybe for him, but he could bear witness, and he could make sure someone saw what this man was doing. So Leonard kept filming. Ray didn't seem to notice. Not yet. All his attention was locked on Alexis like a predator who'd already decided there was no way his prey was getting out alive. "Go ahead," Ray sneered, pushing the barrel harder against her chest. "Flash that badge again. Let's see who comes running for you out here." Alexis stayed quiet, but deep inside, she was counting. Not counting the seconds she had left, counting the seconds until help arrived. She could feel it in her gut they were close. 2 minutes. That's all she needed to buy. But standing there with a gun pressed into her heart, 2 minutes felt like a lifetime. Ray shifted his weight, like he was preparing for something, and then finally he noticed it. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the glow of a cell phone screen. He whipped his head around, spotting Leonard standing by the fence, holding the phone high. Ray's eyes went wild. "Put that down!" he shouted, stepping back half a pace, gun still trained on Alexis. Leonard didn't move. He didn't lower the phone. He didn't say a word. His hands trembled, but he held that phone like it was the only weapon he had. Ray's face twisted in rage. He took another step back, trying to block Leonard's view, but it was too late. The camera had already caught everything. The choke, the shove, the gun. And now, the world was watching. Ray snapped. He turned his gun away from Alexis and pointed it straight at Leonard. "I said, put it down," he barked, stepping toward the fence, fury shaking in his voice. Alexis gasped, her body moving on instinct. "No!" she shouted, stepping toward Ray. But she knew, if he pulled that trigger, if he killed a witness, there was no coming back. Ray stood there, arms shaking, gun pointed directly at the old man, and that's when Leonard finally spoke. His voice, low but steady. "You go ahead, son," Leonard said, staring down the barrel like a man with nothing left to lose. "You do it. Let the whole damn world see exactly who you are." Ray's face twitched, his jaw clenched, his finger tightened. Alexis held her breath, but then, like thunder splitting the sky, the sound of engines roared in the distance. Headlights, black SUVs, FBI plates, sirens blaring. Ray froze, spinning around to look, and in that moment, Alexis moved. She lunged forward, grabbing Ray's gun hand with both of hers, pushing the barrel away from Leonard, using every ounce of strength she had left to drive her elbow into Ray's ribs. Ray stumbled back, trying to regain control of the weapon, but the FBI tactical team was already there. Agents poured out of the SUVs like a tidal wave, surrounding them, weapons raised. "Drop the weapon, hands in the air." Captain Jenna Clark's voice cut through the chaos like a razor. Ray's head whipped around, eyes wide, caught between the woman he thought was his victim and the wall of federal agents now standing between him and freedom. Alexis stood there, chest heaving, throat raw, eyes locked on Ray like a woman who had nothing left to lose. And for the first time that night, it was Ray who looked scared. For a moment, it felt like the whole world stopped breathing. The sound of tires skidding on the gravel, the black SUVs sliding to a halt, federal agents in tactical gear swarming like a wave of pure authority. And yet, Ray Connolly still had his gun, still pointing it, still gripping it so tight his knuckles were turning white. And standing just feet away, Alexis Monroe stood frozen in place. Not because she was afraid, not because she was weak, but because she knew exactly how thin the ice was under all of them right now. One bad move, one bad word, and someone wasn't walking away from this. Captain Jenna Clark took one slow step forward, her voice cutting through the heat, steady and loud through the bullhorn. "Ray Connolly, this is your last warning. Drop the weapon, put your hands in the air. Now." Ray's head snapped toward her, eyes flickering with panic and pride. He wasn't ready to give up. Not yet, because deep down, he still believed this could end his way. He still believed his badge, his uniform, his small-town shield could protect him. So he did the one thing Alexis knew he might do. He laughed. Low, cruel, ugly. He turned back to Alexis, shaking his head like it was all some kind of joke. "Look at you," he spat, sneering. "Standing there, thinking you won." His finger flexed on the trigger, and then, almost like it was rehearsed, he lifted his gun, pressing it right under Alexis's chin. Alexis didn't flinch, not an inch, because she knew something Ray didn't know. They were recording. Everything. Every agent's body cam, every dashboard camera, every lens on every phone still pointed their way. And Ray? He had no idea just how far this was about to go. The agents didn't move. They couldn't. Not with Alexis so close. Jenna's voice rang out again, sharper now, more forceful. "Ray, you're surrounded. We have you on tape. There's no way out." But Ray didn't lower his gun. Instead, he leaned in close. Alexis could feel his breath on her skin again. "You really think your little FBI badge is gonna save you now?" he whispered. And then, right in front of dozens of witnesses, he smirked. That's when Alexis knew he still thought he held the power. And in that split second, Alexis made her move. Without breaking eye contact, without raising her voice, she spoke loud enough for every camera, every agent, every citizen watching to hear. "You're going down. And when you do, the world's gonna remember exactly how you fell." Ray's face twitched. His mouth opened like he was about to snap back. But before he could say another word, Leonard Price, still standing off to the side with his phone recording, shouted just 3 words. "She's live, man." Ray's head jerked toward him. Live? It hit him like a lightning bolt. He wasn't just surrounded by agents. He wasn't just being filmed by a phone. He was live, streaming across social media. Thousands, maybe millions watching. Ray's face twisted into something almost unrecognizable. And then, he did the only thing left a coward could do. He snapped. Ray shoved Alexis back against the Tahoe, ripped the badge off her belt, and threw it on the ground like it was trash. "This means nothing," he shouted, stomping his boot down on the metal badge, grinding it into the dirt. Then he turned, swinging his gun toward the crowd of agents. And for a terrifying moment, it looked like he might try to fight his way out. Jenna Clark didn't blink. "Stand down, Ray," she bellowed. "You pull that trigger, you won't live another 5 seconds." Ray's chest heaved. His hand shook. His finger twitched on the trigger. Alexis, still pressed against the SUV, felt her throat tighten again, not from fear, but from the cold realization of just how close this all was to exploding. And then, out of nowhere, a second voice, not from the agents, not from Alexis, not even from Leonard. It came from behind the SUV convoy, a young man's voice, cracking through the noise, broadcasted loud and clear through a cell phone speaker. 20,000 people watching, dude. Drop the gun. We're all watching." Ray turned toward the sound, confused for a moment. That's when Alexis saw Eli Watkins, the college kid, still live streaming, standing on the shoulder of the highway, holding his phone high above his head, his voice shaking as he spoke again. 20,000. Live, right now. Ray froze. His eyes darted toward Alexis, toward Leonard, toward the agents, toward Ellie. And that's when it finally hit him. It was over. Ray Connolly was done. His hand started to shake. The gun wavered in the air. And slowly, so slowly, his arm began to lower, the gun drooping toward the ground. And in that moment, every camera caught it. Every agent took aim. Every heart in that space held its breath. Ray's hand trembled. The gun was still in his grip, but it was starting to fall. You could see the weight of it pulling on his wrist like gravity itself had turned against him. His eyes darted left and right, searching for a way out, but there wasn't one. Not anymore. The flashing lights from the black SUVs lit up his face like a stage, exposing every drop of sweat on his skin, every crack in his confidence. And standing just a few feet away, Alexis Monroe never took her eyes off him. She knew this moment, the moment when a coward starts to realize his kingdom is nothing but dust. She knew it because she'd seen it before. In war rooms, in interrogation rooms, and now, on a cracked highway shoulder in the middle of North Carolina. But this time, it wasn't just her watching, it was thousands. Tens of thousands. The live stream on Eli's phone had gone viral in minutes. People all across the country were watching this unfold in real time. Grandparents in their living rooms, college students in their dorms, families in diners, airports, city buses, phones lighting up with the same headline, "Live. Sheriff's deputy pulls gun on black FBI agent." No edits, no spin, no cover story. Just the raw, brutal truth. And Ray was finally realizing it. Captain Jenna Clark took another slow step forward, lowering her bullhorn. This time, she didn't need it. Her voice cut through the thick night air like a blade. "Drop the weapon, Ray," she said quietly but firmly. "It's over. Everyone can see you. Everyone's already made up their mind. Don't make it worse." Ray swallowed hard. His jaw clenched like he was grinding his teeth into dust. He looked down at Alexis's badge, still lying in the dirt under his boot, and for a second, you could almost see the thought running through his head. What if I just pull the trigger anyway? What if I go out swinging? Alexis held her breath, every muscle in her body locked tight, because she knew there were men like Ray who couldn't stand losing. Men who'd rather destroy everything than admit they'd already lost. Ray raised his eyes one last time, locking them on Alexis. And then, he made his move. He didn't pull the trigger. He didn't lunge. He didn't run. He simply let go. The gun slipped from his fingers, landing on the asphalt with a dull metallic thud that echoed louder than any shot fired. Time seemed to collapse around them. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of Ray's ragged breathing and the distant whir of helicopter blades overhead. Captain Clark raised her hand, signaling her team forward. "Move in," she ordered. Two agents rushed toward Ray, weapons drawn, barking commands. "Hands on your head! Down on your knees, no!" Ray hesitated, fists clenched, like he was still trying to hold onto some scrap of power. But Alexis took a slow step forward, her voice low, steady, and meant for him. "Do it!" Ray turned toward her one last time. And in that moment, you could see it. The collapse. The realization that it was really over, that no one was coming to save him. No badge, no department, no excuse, nothing. He dropped to his knees, lacing his fingers behind his head, staring down at the ground like it was the only thing left that hadn't turned on him. The agents swarmed him, cuffing his wrists, securing the scene. And standing just a few feet away, Alexis let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. But she didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. Because she knew this wasn't justice. Not yet. Justice didn't stop with one man. It had to go higher. It had to go deeper. And tonight, the real fight was just beginning. Leonard Price lowered his phone, his hands still shaking, tears welling in his tired old eyes. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Alexis looked at him, really looked at him, and nodded. A silent thank you between two people who knew how fragile life could be in moments like this. Eli Watkins, still standing on the side of the road, ended his live stream with a shaky whisper. "They got him," he said. "They really got him." His phone buzzed non-stop with notifications, comments, shares, thousands of people flooding the internet with the story. The hashtags were already trending. Number 2 minutes. Number justice on tape. Number say her name. Alexis leaned down, picking her badge up from the dirt. She brushed the gravel off with her palm, staring at the scratches on the gold lettering. It didn't shine like it used to, but somehow, it had never meant more. She slid it back onto her belt, turned toward Captain Clark, and nodded. "Get him out of here," Alexis ordered. Ray didn't even lift his head as they dragged him toward one of the waiting SUVs. His boots scraped against the pavement like the sound of power crumbling to dust. As the agents loaded him into the vehicle, Alexis turned toward the small group of people still standing on the side of the road. Strangers who had stopped, witnesses who had watched, and people who had recorded. She didn't know their names. She didn't need to, because tonight, they had done something that couldn't be undone. They had made sure the world saw the truth. And as Alexis stood there under the glow of the flashing lights, she knew one thing for certain. This fight wasn't over. It was only getting started. As the last set of handcuffs clicked around Ray Connolly's wrists, the night seemed to finally breathe. The agents pulled him toward the back of the lead SUV, His boots scuffed the gravel like a man who had just lost everything but still hadn't processed it yet. His head hung low, but his jaw stayed clenched tight. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't cocky. He wasn't laughing. He was finished. And standing just a few feet away, Alexis Monroe watched it happen, not with satisfaction, not with triumph, but with a heavy, exhausted silence. Because she knew this moment didn't fix what had been broken. It didn't erase what almost happened on that highway. And it sure didn't undo the system that had created men like Ray in the first place. As she stood there, catching her breath, her eyes drifted toward the edge of the road, toward the shaky figure of Eli Watkins, the college kid, the live streamer, the one who had risked everything to let the world see. Eli stood frozen in place, his phone still raised above his head, the screen glowing in the dark. His chest rose and fell with every shaky breath. His mouth was slightly open, like he was still processing what he'd just witnessed. He had thousands of viewers watching, and yet, somehow, it felt like just him and that woman standing next to the SUV. Their eyes met for the first time. No words passed between them. But in that instant, they both knew they had just survived something much bigger than either of them could fully understand. Alexis took a slow step toward him. Eli's hand lowered just slightly, the live stream still running, the comment feed still exploding with messages. She stopped about 6 feet away, keeping her voice steady, low, but meant for him and for every single person still watching. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. Eli's throat bobbed as he swallowed, trying to find his voice. He glanced down at his screen. 25,000 people still watching. His hands trembled as he tapped the end stream button. The screen went dark, the comment feed freezing in place. Eli finally let out a breath he didn't even know he was holding. He tucked the phone into his back pocket and looked at Alexis, his voice shaking when he finally spoke. I didn't know what else to do." Alexis gave him a nod. "That's exactly what you were supposed to do," she replied. Eli's eyes started to water, but he bit his lip to keep it together. He glanced toward the SUV where Ray sat in the back seat, head down, cuffed, humiliated. And then he looked back at Alexis. You really work for the FBI?" he asked, his voice cracking. Alexis let out the smallest breath of something that almost sounded like a laugh, but it wasn't humor. It was something deeper, something heavier. She reached for the badge still clipped to her belt, the one that Ray had stomped into the ground just minutes earlier. She held it up, turning it toward Eli so he could see it clearly in the glow of the headlights. "Yeah," she whispered. "I do." Eli nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. And then, behind them, another voice spoke up. It was Leonard Price. The older man had stayed back, watching from the shadows of the fence line. He stepped forward now, his phone hanging limp at his side, the recording long since stopped. His steps were slow, his face lined with something deeper than fear, something more like heartbreak. When he reached Alexis and Eli, he didn't say much. He didn't have to. He just looked Alexis in the eye, his voice low and rough. "I've lived here my whole life," Leonard whispered, "and I've seen too many nights like this." Alexis nodded. She knew exactly what he meant. "I know," she whispered back. Leonard swallowed hard. His jaw trembled, like he was holding back a lifetime of anger. "But I ain't never seen anybody fight back the way you just did," he added. Alexis looked away for a moment, her throat tightening. "It shouldn't take a badge," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "It shouldn't take a badge to survive something like this." Leonard nodded. "That's the damn truth," he muttered, his voice breaking. Captain Jenna Clark approached from the side, giving Alexis a quick look of silent acknowledgement. The FBI had control of the scene now. The evidence was secured. The cameras had captured everything. But Alexis, she wasn't ready to leave. "Not yet." She turned back to Eli. "Do you still have that footage?" she asked softly. Eli nodded quickly, pulling his phone back out, unlocking the screen. "It's saved. It's already gone viral," he stammered. "It's everywhere." Alexis gave him a long, hard look. "Good," she whispered. "Don't let anyone take it down. Not the police, not the media, nobody." Eli swallowed hard. "I won't," he promised. Alexis glanced over at Leonard. "And you?" she added, her voice softer now. "Did you get it all?" Leonard raised the phone in his hand. "Every second," he said quietly. Alexis closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the cool night air, because she knew this wasn't over. This footage, this moment, It was just the beginning. The world had seen it now, and whether they wanted to admit it or not, they were part of it. Alexis tucked her badge back onto her belt and turned toward the convoy of black SUVs waiting to take her back to headquarters. But before she climbed inside, she turned back one last time, locking eyes with Eli, with Leonard, and with the small group of strangers who had stopped on the side of the road to bear witness. "You keep recording," she said. "Don't stop, no matter what they say." And with that, she climbed into the back seat of the lead SUV. As the convoy pulled away, the dust from the gravel road swirling into the night sky, one thing was clear. This story wasn't going away. Not this time, because the world had already seen too much to turn back now. As the FBI convoy disappeared down the road, the crowd that had gathered slowly began to thin. People returned to their cars. Some whispered among themselves, still shaken by what they'd just witnessed. Others just stood in stunned silence, staring at the empty stretch of highway like they couldn't quite believe it was real. But for Eli Watkins, it wasn't over, not even close. He stood there on the shoulder, gripping his phone so tight his knuckles ached. The screen was dark now, the live stream long ended, but the notifications were still flooding in like a tidal wave. His heart pounded in his chest as the reality of what had just happened hit him all over again. He had filmed everything, and the whole world had seen it. He could still hear the comments in his head, the people begging for someone to step in. The flood of number 2 minutes hashtags popping up faster than he could read them. His throat felt tight. What if he hadn't stopped? What if he just kept driving? That woman, Alexis Monroe, she could have died right there on that road. He knew it. And so did everybody who watched it happen. He swallowed hard, rubbing the back of his neck as he tried to catch his breath. His head was spinning. His legs felt weak. But before he could even process what to do next, he heard someone approaching behind him. It was Leonard Price. The old man walked up slowly, his phone still in hand, his expression tired but determined. Eli turned to face him, ready to explain himself, ready to apologize if he'd somehow crossed a line. But Leonard didn't yell. He didn't scold. He just nodded once, like a man who understood far more than he let on. "You did good, son," Leonard said quietly. Eli's throat tightened. I didn't know what else to do," he admitted, his voice shaking. Leonard let out a slow breath, looking down at the phone in his own hand. "You did the only thing that mattered," he replied. "You didn't look away." Eli's chest burned with emotion he didn't quite know how to process. He glanced back toward the road again, half expecting another cruiser to come flying down the highway, half expecting someone to show up and demand his phone. But nobody came. Not yet. Leonard shifted his weight, leaning a little heavier on his right leg. "You going home now?" Leonard asked after a long pause. Eli swallowed hard. He didn't know what the right answer was. He wasn't sure if he could just go home. Not after what he'd just seen. Not after what he'd just recorded. Leonard must have read the conflict on his face, because he nodded again. "Well, when you do, make sure you back that video up somewhere they can't touch it," Leonard added. "'Cause trust me, they're gonna come looking for it." Eli's stomach dropped. He hadn't even thought about that yet. He'd heard stories about people who filmed police brutality and had their videos mysteriously deleted. Stories about people getting harassed. Or worse. He looked down at his phone, his fingers trembling. "What if they come after me?" Eli whispered, barely able to get the words out. Leonard looked him square in the eye. "Then you don't let them scare you," he said firmly. "You don't stop. You don't delete it. You stand your ground." Eli swallowed hard again, nodding slowly. I'll figure it out," he murmured. Leonard placed a steady hand on Eli's shoulder. "I'll be watching," Leonard added softly. "We all will." With that, Leonard turned and started walking back toward his truck, parked on the edge of the tree line. Eli stood there for a moment longer, staring down at his phone. His hands were still shaking, but deep down, he knew Leonard was right. This was bigger than him now. He had to protect what he'd captured, because the world needed to see it. And not just once, not just tonight, but over and over and over again. Eli turned and headed toward his car, his mind already racing with what to do next. He needed to upload the footage somewhere safe, somewhere they couldn't reach it. He didn't know much about activism. He wasn't some professional journalist. He wasn't trying to go viral. He was just a kid with a phone, who'd happened to be in the wrong place at the right time. But now, he was part of this story, whether he wanted to be or not. And as the night swallowed up the last bit of sunlight, Eli knew one thing for sure. This was far from over. The next morning, the world had already changed. It wasn't the kind of change you see in headlines or press conferences. It was the kind you feel heavy in the air, quiet but impossible to ignore. Across the country, people were waking up to something they hadn't seen the night before, but something they couldn't stop watching now. The video. Eli's footage had spread like wildfire. It was on Twitter. It was on Facebook. It was on every phone screen from New York to Los Angeles. The comments didn't stop. The hashtags didn't slow down. Number 2 minutes. Number FBI's top. Number Ray Connolly. News anchors tried to catch up, but by the time the morning shows aired, millions had already watched it on their own. Clips of Alexis Monroe standing tall with a gun pressed into her Chester badge thrown on the ground, her life hanging by a thread. Clips of Ray Connolly laughing in her face, like he'd already written her off as nothing. And then, the moment he was cuffed and dragged away, it was all there. No police statement could hide it. No spin could erase it. And in towns and cities all over America, people started gathering. Not in rage, not in chaos, but in silent, small crowds. On courthouse steps, in city parks, outside police stations. People holding their phones above their heads, screens glowing with a single number, 120 seconds, 2 minutes. The time it took for Alexis Monroe to almost lose her life. The time it took for the world to realize that a badge, a title, even the law, couldn't stop men like Ray from trying to take it all away. Eli Watkins had no idea the movement was already exploding. He'd spent the whole night backing up the video, saving copies to cloud storage, external drives, anything he could find. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. But when he finally opened his phone again, he couldn't believe his eyes. He had thousands of new followers, tens of thousands of messages, reporters reaching out from every major network. It didn't even feel real. And yet, every notification, every headline, every stranger in the comment section calling him brave, none of it mattered more than one single thought echoing in his mind. She's alive because I hit record. Meanwhile, back in Asheville, the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility was moving like a machine. The footage had triggered a full-blown investigation. Ray Connolly was already sitting in a holding cell. His badge was stripped, his name plastered on every news station in America. But Alexis, she wasn't interested in cameras or headlines. She was already back to work. Sitting in a cold, windowless conference room with Captain Jenna Clark and her team, Alexis was reviewing every second of body cam footage, dash cam footage, and citizen videos. They had more than enough to take Ray down. But that wasn't what Alexis cared about. Not really, because she knew Ray wasn't the real story. The real story was what came after. It was the system that let him get away with it for years. And now, that system had a spotlight shining on it so bright, it couldn't hide anymore. Jenna leaned across the table, her voice low. "We've already had 24 calls from media outlets," she whispered. "They're asking if you'll speak. National coverage. Prime time." Alexis didn't look up. She kept her eyes on the screen, replaying the moment where Ray smashed her badge into the ground. She pressed pause, staring at the frozen frame. Her voice was cold, flat. "Let them watch the video," she whispered. "Let that speak for itself." Jenna nodded slowly, understanding. Alexis leaned back in her chair, running a hand over her face. She knew the headlines would eventually move on. The country's attention would eventually shift. But the damage would stay. Because for every Alexis Monroe who lived to tell the story, there were countless others who didn't planks. And now, the question hanging over all of them was simple. What happens next? Would people just watch the video and move on? Or would they do something? Would they demand change? Would they stand up before someone else had to fight for their life? Alexis didn't have the answers. Not yet. But one thing was crystal clear in her mind. The world had seen what happened on that highway, and the whole world was waiting to see what happened next. The next 72 hours were nothing short of a national reckoning. What started as a shaky live stream on a rural highway had turned into a movement that swept across every corner of the country. Morning shows ran the story on repeat. Cable networks filled their panels with so-called experts, each trying to explain how something like this could happen to a deputy director of the FBI. But the truth was, nobody needed an expert to explain it. America already knew. For every Alexis Monroe, there were countless others whose names never made the news. People who didn't have badges, didn't have rank, didn't have cameras rolling when their moment came. But now, those silent stories had a face, and the country couldn't stop watching. In Asheville, the courthouse steps filled with people holding signs. Not angry shouts, not chaos, but a quiet, steady presence. Hundreds stood in silence, holding their phones high above their heads, displaying the number 2 o'clock in bold white text. 2 minutes. 2 minutes that could have cost a woman her life. 2 minutes that showed just how fragile justice really was. Inside the FBI field office, Alexis sat at a long table surrounded by senior agents and government attorneys. The footage played again, this time in front of Justice Department officials who had flown in overnight. Nobody spoke. Nobody blinked, because there was nothing left to explain. The evidence spoke louder than words ever could. Captain Jenna Clark leaned over to Alexis, her voice low but firm. "We're filing federal charges," she whispered. "Assault under color of law, civil rights violations, the works." Alexis nodded slowly, but she didn't feel relief. Not yet. Because charging Ray Connolly was the bare minimum. The real question, the one burning in every newsroom, every neighborhood, every family watching this unfold, wasn't whether he'd be charged. It was what would happen after. Would he be the exception? Or would he finally be the start of something bigger? As Alexis sat there, staring at the paused video on the screen, she knew she couldn't stay silent much longer. She wasn't a public speaker. She wasn't looking to become a face on a poster. But deep down, she knew the cameras weren't going away, and if she didn't speak, someone else would control the narrative. So that afternoon, Alexis made the decision she never thought she'd make. She would go public, not for herself, not for headlines, but for every single person who'd ever wondered if anyone was watching, if anyone cared. The press conference was scheduled for 5 p.m. The parking lot outside the FBI field office was packed. Reporters elbowed for position. Cameras lined the barricades like an army of lenses, ready to capture every breath, every word. When Alexis stepped up to the podium, the air felt heavier than she'd ever imagined. She looked out at the sea of microphones, the flashing lights, the crowd that had grown 3 times since the morning. She could feel her pulse pounding in her throat. But when she gripped the edges of the podium and leaned into the microphone, her voice didn't shake. "My name is Alexis Monroe," she began, her words clear and deliberate. "I am a deputy director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The crowd leaned in. He took a slow breath and continued. "3 days ago, I was driving home after a security briefing when I was stopped by a sheriff's deputy on a rural highway outside this city." She paused, letting that truth settle in the air. "He didn't stop me because I was speeding. He didn't stop me because I was swerving. He stopped me because he could." Alexis looked out over the crowd, her voice rising just enough for every camera to catch her next words. "I showed him my badge. I showed him my credentials. And do you know what he did?" The crowd was silent, holding its breath. He laughed. Her grip tightened on the podium. He laughed. Because men like him don't see a badge. They don't see a title. They see a target. Alexis leaned in, her voice steady and sharp. "I survived. But not because of my training. Not because of my badge. I survived because you were watching." She glanced toward the back of the crowd, where Eli Watkins stood, holding his phone at his side, tears welling in his eyes. "And tonight," Alexis continued, "I'm asking you to keep watching, not just for me, not just for the people you see on the news, but for every single person who didn't have a camera, who didn't have an audience." The cameras clicked like rain on a tin roof. Alexis took one last breath. "Don't let this stop with one man," she said. "Let it be the beginning of what comes next." With that, she stepped back from the podium and walked away, leaving the microphones buzzing, the cameras rolling, and the world waiting for what would happen next. Alexis Monroe walked off that stage like a soldier leaving the battlefield. No applause, no victory, because she knew this wasn't a victory. Not yet. She didn't stop when the reporters shouted her name. She didn't stop when the cameras tried to follow her. She just kept walking, each step heavier than the last. Captain Jenna Clark caught up with her just inside the building. "You sure you don't want to give them more?" Jenna asked softly, falling into step beside her. Alexis shook her head. "No," she whispered. "I said what needed to be said." She didn't owe them anything more. She didn't owe anyone anything more, not after what had just happened. They made their way to the elevator in silence. The doors slid shut, cutting off the noise from outside. Alexis leaned back against the wall, closing her eyes for the first time in what felt like days. Jenna stood across from her, arms crossed. After a long pause, Jenna spoke again. "We've got confirmation," she said quietly. "Ray Connolly's being transferred to federal custody first thing in the morning." Alexis didn't open her eyes. She just nodded. Jenna continued. "They're charging him with aggravated assault under color of law, unlawful use of force, and deprivation of civil rights." Another pause. Alexis let out a slow breath through her nose. "And what about his department?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jenna shifted her weight, pressing her lips into a thin line. "They're resisting," she admitted. "Trying to distance themselves. Call it a rogue deputy, acting alone." Alexis opened her eyes then, her jaw tightening. Of course they were, because the system always tried to save itself first. She pushed off the wall, standing up straight, looking Jenna dead in the eye. "Make sure they know. We're not done," Alexis said firmly. "This doesn't stop with Ray." Jenna nodded, her expression hardening. "I'll make sure they know." Alexis turned toward the elevator doors just as they slid open again. The hallway was empty, dimly lit, eerily quiet. She started walking toward her office, her footsteps echoing off the cold floor. But something about the silence felt wrong. Too quiet. She rounded the corner and stopped dead in her tracks. Because someone was standing outside her office. Leonard Price, the old man from the highway. The man who had stood there, recording, when no one else dared to move. Alexis felt her throat tighten. She hadn't expected to see him again. Not here. Not now. Leonard turned when he saw her, clutching his old phone in both hands, like it was the most valuable thing he owned. He gave her a small, respectful nod. Alexis walked toward him slowly. Neither of them spoke at first. When she finally reached him, Leonard cleared his throat. I heard you were speaking today," he said quietly. I had to come." Alexis nodded, folding her arms across her chest, bracing herself. "You shouldn't have put yourself at risk that night," she whispered. "He could have turned that gun on you." Leonard let out a breath that sounded like it carried the weight of decades. "Wouldn't have been the first time a man like that pointed a weapon at me," he replied softly. "And it sure as hell won't be the last." Alexis swallowed hard, feeling the sting behind her eyes again. "I just wanted to thank you," she added. "You didn't have to do what you did." Leonard shook his head slowly. "No, I did," he whispered. "We all do." He held up his phone. "I still got the footage," he added. "Backed it up. Sent it to my kids. Sent it to every reporter who asked. They ain't gonna bury this. Not this time." Alexis felt a lump rise in her throat. Leonard leaned in just a little, lowering his voice. "You started something, Agent Monroe," he said. "And now you gotta see it through." Alexis let out a slow breath, nodding. "I know," she whispered. Leonard took a step back, slipping his phone into his pocket. "You need anything, you just say the word," he added. "You ain't standing alone in this." Alexis nodded again, her voice catching. "Thank you, Leonard." He gave her one last nod and turned to leave, his footsteps slow but steady as he disappeared down the hallway. Alexis stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty space he'd left behind. And in that moment, she realized something. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It never had been. This belonged to everyone who refused to look away. Everyone who dared to bear witness, and everyone who believed that 2 minutes could change everything. It was just past midnight when the city finally seemed to settle, but not inside the federal detention center on the edge of Asheville. Inside those concrete walls, Ray Connolly sat alone in a cold cell. No badge, no gun, no authority, just a man in a jumpsuit, stripped of everything he used to hide behind. He'd spent the last few hours pacing the floor like a caged animal. His hands trembling, his jaw locked tight, his mind replaying every second of that highway stopover and over again. He thought it was supposed to go his way. He thought his badge, his status, his town would shield him like it always had. But now, the cameras had turned on him. The public had turned on him. And worst of all, his own department had turned on him. They didn't defend him. They didn't back him. They called him a disgrace to the badge, a lone actor, a liability they never should have hired. Ray clenched his fists, grinding his teeth until his gums ached. They could lie all they wanted, but he knew the truth. He wasn't the first one to do what he did. He wasn't the only one who had used that badge like a weapon. And yet, somehow, he was the only one sitting in a cell. He couldn't stand it, couldn't believe it. Couldn't breathe without feeling the walls closing in tighter and tighter. And the worst part? The thing that ate at him more than the cold floor or the silence? It was the video. No matter how many times he tried to forget it, it kept playing in his head like a sick joke. That kid's phone, that old man by the fence, those flashing lights. And worst of all, Alexis Monroe's face. She didn't beg. She didn't break. She just stood there. And now, every news station in America had her face on loop, calm, controlled, unshaken. And him? They showed him losing it, choking her, laughing at her badge, pointing a gun at her chest, and falling to his knees when the feds closed in. He could still hear the chants outside the courthouse earlier that day. 2 minutes. 2 minutes that had destroyed his entire life. Ray paced again, dragging his palms down his face like he could somehow erase what had happened. But it was too late. The footage had already sealed his fate. And tomorrow, he'd face a federal judge. For the first time in his life, Ray wouldn't be standing in a uniform, wouldn't be giving orders, wouldn't be holding a gun. He'd be standing alone, with nothing left to hide behind. And that reality? It cut deeper than any sentence they could throw at him. Because deep down, Ray knew something no headline could explain. This wasn't just about him. This was bigger, much bigger. Because now, the whole damn country was looking at every cop who had ever done what he did and gotten away with it. And Ray? He was the first one to fall. But he wouldn't be the last. Morning hit like a thunderstorm across the nation. What started as one live stream had now turned into something bigger than anyone could have predicted. The hashtags weren't slowing down. The protests weren't dying out. And the media couldn't stop running it on repeat. 2 minutes. It had become a rallying cry overnight. Cities all over America were now holding silent demonstrations. Not just Asheville, not just North Carolina. It had spread coast to coast. Los Angeles, Chicago, Atlanta, New York. People weren't chanting. They weren't looting. They weren't yelling into microphones. They were silent. Silent. Standing in public spaces, holding signs, holding phones, holding their breath. People stood with their arms raised, showing their phone screens with the numbers 2 o'clock displayed, like a digital memorial for every victim who didn't get 2 minutes to be saved. And in living rooms across the country, especially in the homes of older Americans, families watched. Some with tears, some with anger, some with a look in their eyes like they had seen this before. Because they had. It was the same story, just with a new face, a new headline. And this time, the woman lived to tell it herself. The FBI's official press office released a statement that morning. It was brief. It was cold. It was expected. We have opened a full investigation into the conduct of Deputy Sheriff Ray Connolly. We stand with Deputy Director Alexis Monroe and all our agents who put their lives on the line every day. But Alexis, she knew better than anyone. Words were cheap, statements didn't fix broken systems, and speeches didn't rebuild trust. That afternoon, Alexis watched the coverage from her office alone. The anchors were already moving on to the next debate, asking questions about policy, procedure, reform. But Alexis wasn't listening to their words. She was watching the people, the silent crowds, the older folks standing in wheelchairs, the veterans standing with their hats pressed to their chests. The college kids with homemade cardboard signs. That's when her phone buzzed on the desk. It was Jenna. Turn on Channel 5. The message read. Alexis grabbed the remote, flipping the channel. And there broadcasting live was a crowd outside Buncombe County Sheriff's Department. Not protesters, not activists. Citizens. Dozens of them. Many of them older, with walkers, canes, and folding chairs. They weren't yelling. They weren't breaking windows. They were sitting right on the steps of the department that had protected Ray Connolly for years. Some held signs that read, "My son didn't have a badge. My daughter never made it to 2 minutes. We're still waiting for justice." Alexis felt her chest tighten because she recognized some of the faces. People who had filed complaints over the year. People who had come to her office. People who had begged someone to stop men like Ray long before that night. And there they were, still waiting. Alexis reached for her coat without thinking. She wasn't going to sit behind a desk while the people who had fought long before her stood outside, alone. She called Jenna on the way out. "I'm going down there," she said. Jenna didn't argue. She just said, "I'll meet you there." By the time Alexis arrived at the sheriff's department, the crowd had tripled. Cameras were there, but nobody was talking to them. The people weren't there to perform. They were there to be seen. Alexis stepped out of her vehicle, her breath catching in her throat when she saw Leonard Price standing at the front of the crowd. He held a folded piece of paper in his hands. As she approached, the crowd turned to face her not with cheers, but with recognition. Leonard stepped forward, offering the paper with both hands. Alexis took it carefully, unfolding it. It was a list. Dozens of names. Names of people who had filed complaints against officers in that very department. Names of people whose stories never made the news. Alexis looked up, her eyes stinging. Leonard leaned in, his voice low. "You said not to let it stop with one man," he whispered. "Well, here's where it starts." Alexis folded the paper back up, clutching it in her hands like it weighed 100 pounds, because in that moment, she realized something powerful. This wasn't just about justice for herself. This was about every name on that list, and all the names that had never been written down. Alexis turned to the crowd, standing a little taller. She didn't have a podium, she didn't have a microphone, but she had her voice. And today, she was going to use it. Alexis Monroe stood in front of the people who had gathered not for her, but for every person who had never gotten this moment. And she knew she couldn't let them leave without hearing the truth. Not the version they'd get from the news. Not the polished sound bites from Washington. The real truth. She took a slow step forward, her voice rising just enough for the people in the back to hear her. "I wasn't supposed to walk away from that stop," she began. Her words floated over the crowd like a cold wind. "I wasn't supposed to, but I did." She looked down at the paper Leonard had handed her, feeling the names like a weight in her hands. "But you and I both know, there are too many who didn't." The crowd didn't move. They didn't make a sound. They just listened. Alexis glanced around, her throat tightening. "My badge didn't save me," she continued softly. "My title didn't protect me." She looked back toward Leonard, then toward the faces in the crowd, faces lined with loss, with pain, with memories they couldn't forget. "I survived because you were watching, because someone hit record, because someone refused to look away." She let that truth hang in the air for a moment, and then she took another step forward. "But I need you to hear me," she said, her voice growing firmer. "This fight, it isn't over. Not even close." Alexis raised the paper in her hand for the crowd to see. "These names," she said, "are just the beginning." She swallowed hard. "This isn't about me. This is about every single person who filed a complaint and got ignored. Every family who buried a loved one and never got answers. Every citizen who got told to stay quiet, to move on, to let it go." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "And it's about every officer, every department, every system that counted on us to do just that." She lowered the paper, holding it tight to her chest. "I'm here to tell you I'm not moving on. I'm not letting this go, and I'm damn sure not staying quiet." The crowd began to shift, shoulders straightening, eyes sharpening. Alexis took one final step forward, standing right on the edge of the steps, looking every single person in the eye. "If you stood for me that night," she said, her voice low but steady, "stand for them now." A ripple moved through the crowd. Alexis turned to Leonard. "Tell them their names will not be forgotten," she whispered. Leonard nodded, his voice trembling. "They hear you," he said. And that's when Alexis did something no one expected. She stepped down off the steps, into the crowd. People parted, making space as she moved through them, not as a federal agent, not as a public figure, but as one of them. And when she reached the front row, she stopped in front of a woman holding a framed photo of a young man. Alexis reached out, gently placing her hand over the woman's place. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. The woman's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, squeezing Alexis's hand like she'd been waiting years to hear those words. And that's when the crowd started to move. One by one, people began stepping forward, holding out photos, holding out names, holding out stories they'd been carrying for years. And Alexis stood there, listening to every single one. No cameras, no microphones, just people, finally being heard. It didn't make the pain go away. It didn't erase what happened, but it was a start. Hours passed before the crowd finally began to thin. People hugged each other. People shared phone numbers. People made plans to come back tomorrow, because they all knew this wasn't just a moment, it was a movement. And Alexis? She was ready to lead it. When the last few people drifted away, Alexis turned to Jenna, who had been standing quietly in the background the entire time. Jenna walked up beside her, glancing around at the empty steps. "You ready to go?" she asked softly. Alexis looked back at the building. The same building that had turned a blind eye for years. She nodded slowly. "Yeah," she whispered. "But we're coming back." Jenna smiled, knowing exactly what she meant. As they walked toward the car, Alexis paused one last time. She looked up at the sky, stars scattered across the dark canvas above her. She thought about all the names she'd heard that night, the stories, the families, the pain. And she knew her work wasn't finished, not by a long shot, because power, real power, wasn't in a badge. It wasn't in a title. It was in the people who refused to give up. And Alexis Monroe had just found her army. She took one last deep breath, feeling the weight of the night settle into something that felt a little less like defeat and a little more like hope. Because no matter what tomorrow brought, the world was watching. And this time, the world wasn't looking away. Sometimes, life reminds us that it only takes 2 minutes to reveal the truth. 2 minutes to show the world who people really are. 2 minutes to change the course of a life or even a nation. But the real lesson here isn't just about the time it takes. It's about who chooses to watch, who chooses to stand up, to speak up, to hit record when nobody else will. You see, silence is easy, looking away is easy. But real courageous change starts when ordinary people refuse to stay silent. And maybe you're sitting at home thinking, what difference could I make? Let me tell you something. You don't have to wear a badge. You don't have to hold a title. All you have to do is not look away. Because when we pay attention, when we stand together, that's when the world finally starts to listen. And if this message touched you today, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that matters. Let's keep this conversation going together.